All of February, we're celebrating Black History Month with stories that connect Chicago to American history. And the city became a hub for the arts. Before the Harlem Renaissance, there was Bronzeville.
In essence, Chicago was the gathering place for creativity.
Historian Pomone Rami is a pillar of Chicago's Black creative community and the author of When Blackness Was Golden.
The word began to spread that Chicago was the place to come. A lot of the people that developed here ended up going to New York and starting the Harlem Renaissance. Richard Wright, Nancy Hughes was here. A lot of those folks found home here first.
Rami says it wasn't just that Chicago was one of the first stops in the Great Migration. We were a beacon for Black communities nationwide.
Ebony Magazine, because of Jet, because of the Defender, we controlled a lot of the media in this country out of Chicago.
For Chicagoans and visitors alike, the Bronzeville area social spots quickly became must-see tourism.
Gladys's was a destination point for biscuits. People would come from all around the country to eat this woman's biscuits on 47th Street. When the Rolling Stones and some of those other groups came to Chicago, they went to Teresa's. They came to the South Side because that's where the music, the lifestyle was great.
And although Chicago wasn't under the racist restrictions of Jim Crow, segregation was still an issue.
Because of the fact that we were not allowed to go to certain venues, it built those other venues up in our own community. People talk now about the fact that money doesn't circulate that much in the Black community. Well, it doesn't now, but it did. Because when you're not allowed to go outside of your community, then you have to spend your money at home. And that's what happened, and that's how the South Side grew. We built the first Black hospital in Providence. We built the first Black nursing home. We developed the Black psychologists. Black History Month started really here at the YWCA on 38th and Wabash.
Well, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed that clip. I'm Reverend Susan Smith. I am the Director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development, and we are really, really, really happy that you're here. I'm calling this evening's program a community critical conversation because in recognition of Black August, we're emphasizing the work that has been done and is being done by Black people in the areas of politics, advocacy, culture, and all of the things that make African American culture as rich as it is.
It is so, and I'm Reverend Marcus Tabb, also with the Office of Clergy and Resource Development with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And it is so important that we know who we are and how we got here. Tonight, the conversation promises to be enlightening and encouraging. Our guests are Mrs. Sherry Williams, president of the Bronzeville Historical Society, and that will be with us is Dr. Christopher Reed, a retired professor who taught at Roosevelt University right here in Chicago.
Yeah, and I was just really excited. I don't know if y'all can see me grinning because I love history and all those pictures of Bronzeville as it was coming along. I just love it. And so I'm honored and I'm excited to have our guests, and I'm really ready to hear them tell the story of this great city. But before we get into that, I just want to share for those of you who may not be aware that this is Black August, and it's very important.
Black August, if you don't know, is a month-long celebration that originated in or from California's prison system in 1979 and honors Black political prisoners, freedom fighters, and historical resistance against the racial and colonial oppression, commemorating key figures like George and Jonathan Jackson, as well as milestones like Haitian Revolution and Nat Turner's Rebellion, which is my favorite.
Yeah. This is a time for us to remember and to celebrate and to give Thanksgiving for the work and the tenacity and the resilience of the people who came before us, for the work that they did in the name of freedom, justice, and fairness for all of us. So we're going to include in our summary that we send out, we're going to include a short summary or schedule of activities that are going to be going on through the end of August in Chicago for those of you who are interested. But now let's talk with our guests. I am so excited. Welcome, Miss Sherry. How are you doing?
All is well, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this conversation. I learned something new, and especially so with you guys being my neighbors to the north. Bronzeville Historical Society is certainly so happy to have met you guys and look forward to the conversation coming up.
Yeah, even in the clips when I saw Bronzeville, I mean, I just get like goosebumps because it says to me, gosh, Jesus, no matter what they have tried to do to make us go away, erase us, eliminate us, ignore us, make us whatever they want, they have not succeeded. And that, when I see that, I get very, very excited. So when I saw that thing that said Bronzeville, I said, come on, brothers and sisters, let's do what we do and they've been trying for 400 years, and they haven't succeeded. But anyway, do me a favor and just share with our listeners how you came to be the president of the Bronzeville Historical Society
Well,
Association.
I'm so thrilled to share this story. My daughters, whom attended Douglas Elementary School, which is now Persian on 32nd and Calumet. We would drive to my mom's house often before I would take them to school. And every time we would ride down King Drive, I would point out the same locations and give the same narrative that my grandmother gave me as a child. So I was born in Inglewood because of the Dan Ryan being constructed starting in 1954. And so I'm that one generation that was not able to claim Bronzeville as my birth home, but certainly my family members, many of them were born in Bronzeville. So in 1942, when my grandmother arrived in Chicago, she lived at 31st and Wentworth, and she began attending Allen Temple AME Church, which was at 30th and State Street. So I was baptized there in 1960. But needless to say, we were still making Allen Temple AME Church our church home. And so the drive from Inglewood into Bronzeville meant that my grandmother would tell us every building that they lived in, because people
Mm,
move so often, what, every May or something. And she would also share with me and my brothers the rich history of the community. So, pointing out where she may have seen, Black soldiers returning from World War II. She may have seen many people who made Bronzeville home, like Ida B. Wells. So she would point out their homes and their locations and where meetings were held and that kind of thing. And I did the same with my daughters to the point that they were nauseated by it. And we just drive to grandma's house without the storytelling. 'Cause, I didn't do it on occasion. I did it every day.
oh wow. Oh wow. I
And
love
so,
it.
yeah, so they suggested that we start the Bronzeville Historical Society. And so my daughters were quite young. They were 17 and 10 and 7 and they were very young, but they became the incorporators of Bronzeville Historical Society along with my mother. And that would have been in 1999.
Wow. Wow. Are you surprised at how it's grown? And I mean, do your daughters say to you, Mom, I'm so glad you told us those stories every day? I mean, what type of feedback are you getting in your own spirit and from your daughters?
Not only my daughters have been engaged in this work, family members and neighbors, extended cousins,
Oh, wow.
and certainly I'm looking at my grandchildren as
I know
well.
you are.
Yeah, my grandson, just not even a year ago, he overheard a conversation I had with someone that in June 2025, Bronzeville Historical Society was designated a National Underground Railroad Network to
I saw
Freedom
that.
site. So that's a mouthful. And
Mhm.
while I was sharing with a couple people on the narratives that was shaped around us being able to successfully get this designation, it included my great great grandfather who served in the 12th Regiment of U.S. Colored Troops. His name is Nero Cooper. And I
Mm.
kept been portraying his wife, my great great grandmother, Millie Cooper, as a washerwoman. Not only was she a washerwoman during the Civil War era, she also taught her daughters how to create enterprise. So they were entrepreneurs very early on in being washerwomen. So I have four generations of women in my family who were all washerwomen, including my mother, who carried on the family recipe on how to make soap. And what I was sharing with this person was that we were demonstrating, I would put 1860 garment on and I would demonstrate the amount of strength you had to have in order to pull up very wet, heavy clothing, because their dresses were all the way to the ankle. And my grandson, when the guests left, came over and said, "Grandmother, why didn't you tell me that my great 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 grandfather served in the Civil War?" So it, leaned to my really understanding that he was then 8, that he understood clearly that this was something significant. And so I encourage anyone that's listening to us now to not forget including children or young people or
Absolutely.
anyone in the conversation about your own family's rich history as well as the community history. Because as soon as he shared with me that he was a little salty about my not sharing that with him, um, I got a uniform for him where he doted, and he's grown out of it now, but he would dote a U.S. colored troop uniform whenever we would do tours in Bronzeville. So
Oh.
yeah, so I'm really
You,
happy about that.
you know what you're saying is so important because I tell the story frequently of how some years ago at my church we were doing uh uh Kwanzaa, and we were trying to do that, the what do you call that stuff? The
With
pouring the water in the thingy. I'll get it in a minute.
people,
But anyway, we're supposed to mention your ancestors.
yes,
And nobody knew anybody except their grandmothers.
yes.
And that was it still bothers me when I think of it. The power in what you're talking about in terms of your you from your grandmother and from your mother and your grandmother. Now, it gives you a different sense of yourself in a world where the majority population is working hard to tell you that you're nothing and that you don't have a culture and nothing came from you. It really does something to strengthen you. So I'm hoping that people are listening to you too and just begin to do the work. I have an aunt she's passed now, but man, she got into that genealogy stuff, and we would hate to go for Thanksgiving because she'd be having all her, here we go. But it's so valuable. It's so valuable. So it gives you something to have. So I love that story. I love it. Let me just share something with our people because I don't know if they know how Bronzo came to be. And you stop me, Miss Sherry, if I'm wrong on anything, because I was trying to do my homework and learn so I could sound like I had some sense. But here we go. So Bronzeville became an established neighborhood around the turn of the 20th century. Prior to its more official naming, the media referred to the Bronzeville neighborhood and adjacent areas using derisive names such as Black Belt and the Black Ghetto, and even more appalling names such as Darky Town.
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, this poor representation on the part of the media coincided with a relatively recent surge in the population of Black Americans in Chicago as a result of the Great Migration from the southern regions of the United States. So the Great Migration began in 1916, and by 1920, the number of Black residents in Chicago had surpassed 100,000. And so to redirect the community's nominal identity, a man named James J. Gentry, an editor for Anthony Overton, proposed the term Bronzeville as a less derisive name for the small but impactful neighborhood. Thus, the name Bronzeville not only represents the community's residents, but represents resistance and the efforts of a community to define itself on its own terms. Is that pretty much accurate? What did I leave out?
You left out nothing. I wanted to add a footnote that when Gentry coined that term Bronzeville, from what I've read through previous articles, it was a contest associated with that term. So,
Mm,
like we saw, Jet magazines had the Bronze Beauty of the Week.
mm,
He had a contest for folks voting by buying subscriptions to the Chicago Bee newspaper into as a competition to the Defender newspaper.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that's how, Anthony Overton's newspaper was, heavily involved in how that term was coined and also circulated. But yeah, so there were bronze beauties to be able to get people to want to grab the paper to increase the circulation for the Chicago Bee newspaper.
I love it. I love it. So I I've never so now I'm gonna have to go back and look up at some of those papers. I'm just saying because I get really curious and people say stuff. But I remember when I was working at the Baltimore Afro American, I was a reporter there, and I was writing my stories like The white folks write them, because I grew up in Detroit and, we had the Detroit News and the Detroit, and I had read all that stuff. So I was writing my little stories like I had seen them right there. And Ida Peters, who was Bishop Vashti McKenzie's mother, was she was an editor or some bigwig on the thing. She called me up. She said, Susan, stop writing like the white people. She said, colored people, the white people, they don't care about all that stuff. Colored people want to know who was there. I will never forget that because I used to get irritated when you had a story. So there's like, they did whatever, a debutante ball or whatever. So there's a paragraph about that, and then paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of who was there. That's what our people wanted to know because they needed the
Oh,
affirmation.
yes,
I
yes.
needed the affirmation. I didn't understand it then. Now I followed her, because she wasn't nobody to fool with. But I didn't understand it then. And I think that as the work that you're doing, I'm wondering if you have found that the work you're doing helps in that whole affirmation process for our people.
Absolutely. So imagine that when I started this work, it was just myself and other postal workers who
Mm.
added on to the effort of us collecting stories locally. So we knew that a great number of notables were not well written, hard to find. So even if we think about, say, for instance, Annie Turnbull Malone.
Hmm.
So the very footprint of where Proctor is at and where Bronzeville Historical Society is at was once the footprint of Pearl Block. So where we now look at Mollison School on the north corner of 44th Street and then the Parkway Ballroom at the south corner, this entire block was Pearl Block, which was owned for by Annie Turnbull Malone, who is truly the first recorded black female millionaire, not Madam
Wow.
C.J. Walker. So we're on
Wow.
hallowed ground that our operations and the work that we're doing is on the footprint of where one of the most notable women in terms of philanthropy not only had her factories here manufacturing hair products, but she also had her home and she had a second home next door to it, which was a tourism home. So she clearly understood travelers coming in and about Chicago needed to know where they could safely dwell or stay for extended days at a time. And so a lot of us understand that the Green Book also was a complement to how Black people would know where they can stay all over the United States, where they were welcome in gas stations and hotels and restaurants. And so, one of the things that we found out, myself and my daughters, was that there were still people with living memories of what this block looked
Oh,
like before it
wow.
was demolished.
Do
And
they
that,
have pictures of it? Do they have pictures?
oh yeah, there's a
Okay.
number of
Okay.
pictures. And then some of the descendants of her have written some really great books as well. But, needless to say, that's how I got introduced to Timuel Black and to a beautiful lady named Jerry Oliver, who was the proprietor of Jerry's Palm Tavern. And so to talk to people who had living, memories that, remember her intimately because she didn't die until the 50s, that's what blew me away that I realized that we have a lot of work to do in terms of capturing stories and not just relying on death records or obituaries, but seeking out to find about who's out there that can tell an intimate story about these individuals.
Yes. Marcus, can you come come on screen for a minute and share the story you told about the man who wore his uniform? Marcus, are you there? Okay, I didn't prepare him for that, but I think that story that he was sharing before we started, that's very important because when kids see that, and adults see it too, and they have to ask the question, what are you
Right.
doing? What do you got that funny uniform on for? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And they hear the story, it makes a profound difference, and so that's why I think I'm so excited about the work that you're doing. Maybe Marcus will
Thank
come when he
you.
comes back through. But so you then must have a lot of information and photographs and artifacts about all the things that happened in Chicago that affected Black people, including the stuff that happened in 1919. For those of you who don't know what happened in 1919, it was called the Red Summer, and it was described as a series of massacres that occurred across the country. In Chicago, the violence began when this young African American boy, Eugene Williams, drowned at the beach after a white man stoned him for crossing the invisible race line. So the lack of effective police response, because the police didn't protect us then or now, coupled with the already growing tensions from the influx of Black residents into the city, because they were mad because they said it produced competition for jobs and housing and jobs. It caused the Black beachgoers to protest against the inaction. They were mad. They were watching police officers just kind of standing around on the sides looking at what was going on. And the people who were on the beach were mad. And so more police officers arrived and the tensions worsened. And then at one point, a Black man fired a gun towards the police and he was instantly shot down, but it went from there. Do you have artifacts and things from that period of time? And can you share what those are?
I actually do not have artifacts related to the 1919 race riots, but what I found out when we started processing the Jackson Funeral Home records nearly 15 years ago, there were a group of ladies from the Afro-American Genealogical Historical Society that had an opportunity to go inside of what is now a closed building, the Jackson Funeral Home on 74th and Cottage Grove. So these ladies from the genealogical group, Nettie, Letty, Doris, and I'm going to miss someone's name, but needless to say, they were given access to begin processing the funeral records. And so they did come across some burial records for those who were killed during the 1919 Chicago race riots. Secondly, the records are now deposited in the care of the Vivian Harsh Research Collection, which is inside of Woodson Regional Library at 9525 South Halsted. In addition to those Jackson Funeral Home records that, clearly are showing details about the tragedy of the 1919 race riot, are funeral records from McGavick Funeral Home. And that's whom actually did the funeral for Eugene Williams, that first man who was slain as a result of that, understood invisible white line in the middle of Lake
The
Michigan.
water, right?
Yeah, we can't even imagine these kind of operations of restricting yourselves to places.
Crazy.
And so those records are there. Newspaper accounts through the Tribune and the Defender are now more easily available for those who want to really take a look at how this tragedy, this massacre, impacted Chicago in particular. And so, we have that as a way that people can kind of read it for themselves to grasp some of the things that were going on at that time. But physically, the only thing I have in my possession here is the database that was created out of a lot of the funeral records. So we have about 120,000 names in our
Wow.
database
Okay.
just from Jackson Funeral Home. And
Wow.
so, yeah, Jackson was one of the funeral directors that were a part of, A.A. Rayner, and so we would have had Charles Jackson and some other funeral directors who created the Metropolitan Funeral Home, which is where your office is at now. So it's more than one funeral company. They combined their work together, although Jackson had its own physical space. A. Rayner had his own physical space along State Street as well in the 1930s. Yeah, so long history of how these funeral businesses have survived
Really interesting.
generations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you just say that our building used to be the funeral home?
It used to be the funeral home, Metropolitan Funeral Home. Yes, yes,
I didn't
ma'am.
know that.
Uh-huh. Might make you
Okay.
think about some occurrences there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, So you've done a lot of work to unearth a lot of stuff. Tell me something that you unearthed or discovered that just gave you pause. Just, it was just so profound or so, it just made you have to stop for a moment. Can you share one of those?
I would say early on, before PepsiCo, Quaker Oats decided to remove the face and name off of Aunt Jemima products, that just looking at her life, 20 years prior to that gave me pause. Because I, one, had to understand this was a woman who was born enslaved in 1843, and that she somehow managed to materialize her whole persona through this imagery of what some people might say was a mammy. And but when I looked at her and saw that she on the packaging had a head wrap and she had this smiling, beautiful face, I thought about those many women whom I saw when in the kitchen, and that's when they wrapped their hair. And that's, they weren't in the kitchen looking like that last box that they had with a black woman with pearls on and a pressing curl. They were women who understood that when they were switching the roles that they had in their family, when you go out to the garden, you're likely going to cover everything up, and including your
Mm-hmm.
in order to not get, chewed up by the bugs or have debris or any other thing. So I looked at that as a proud example of how the women I saw who were doing chores or even cooking, how they would come into the kitchen prepared for that type of work. And so once I took a look at Nancy Green, who was the original Aunt Jemima, 1893, she served more than over 100,000 people. 50,000 boxes of this pancake mix was distributed and sold during the World's Fair of 1893 right here in Chicago. So I had to think about, this woman had to have incredible strength in order to stand up for the length of time she would have had to do this service. She was an actress, she was a storyteller, but more importantly, she was also a deaconess at Olivet Baptist Church. And so the newspaper articles don't speak glowing terms about her work as this Aunt Jemima figure, but they do note that she was responsible for the launch of the success of this pancake mix. Few items in newspapers do note that she was a member of Olivet Baptist Church and that she was a missionary there. But outside of that, there isn't a whole lot outside of this death notice about her. We don't know really what happened between the time she arrived in Chicago and the time of her death. We just know those few notes. But that was enough for me to understand that she had meaning and that she had, a spirit around her faith, because they made certain that they mentioned that she was a missionary at Olivet Baptist Church. And so that let me know that she had been doing things that was of service and of service to God. And so, to have endured enslavement, 20 plus years you were enslaved, and then to come out and now have, people talking about, well, who was she? What was she like? And those very few details were only left about her, but it was enough for me to say, praise God for her. Because she would have been there for the 1919 race riot when they turned Olivet Baptist
Mm-hmm.
Church into the Red Cross.
Mm-hmm.
Those 1,000 people who lost their homes, the 500
Mm-hmm.
plus people that were injured, the 38 people who lost their lives, those families would have all came to Olivet Baptist Church on the corner of 31st and King Drive for first aid, for food, for employment opportunities. All of that was happening in 1919, and she was still alive until 1920.
Wow.
So
So
that
did you leave the effort to get her picture off of the box?
I actually wanted it to remain. And
Oh, okay.
because for 15 years I've been talking, it was over 30 women that portrayed for the product brand over a
Mm-hmm.
120-year history.
Mm-hmm.
And the families, I met three families whom had, wanted the images to remain, but wanted them to be explained. Why
Mm.
is this alarming to some people to say, oh, I really think it's derogatory because she's wearing a bandana, and that's, again, reflecting that she would have been a person who was a servant in a home. But all of the family members that I spoke to, and I've spoken to dozens of them, all wanted the images to remain. They just wanted the product company largely to explain that she was an actress and she was portraying someone who was a servant in families, and she was portraying someone who was a mother, and she was portraying someone who had this fantastic recipe that is globally known.
Was it her recipe?
It was her recipe.
Okay. I
And
never knew that. I never knew that. I just thought white folks made something and they put her picture on it. So I didn't know that.
yeah, so there's documents that show the actual handwritten recipes, and
Really?
there's pictures. And matter of fact, some of the family members still had artifacts based off of her work around doing fundraising so that Olivet Baptist Church could contribute to other efforts like establishing Black Baptist colleges. So it's
Hmm.
beyond just the one thing of her being a brand ambassador. She was raising money for a lot of places just off of her persona, coming
Wow.
in. So we have a few of pictures of some of the other women who portrayed for the brand, like Edith Wilson is considered the last Angel Mama. And she
Hmm.
also lived here in Chicago. She had a headstone already. So when we placed Nancy Green's headstone down September 5th, 2020, it was because she didn't have a marker. But there are other women, 30 plus women who portrayed for the brand, and most of them already had headstones.
Wow. I'm still stuck on the fact that it was her recipe. You
Yeah,
say certain things and I have to remember where I am because I'm saying,
yeah,
oh,
a
wow.
recipe, newspaper accounts, attribute her to having a recipe as well. Some of them a little bit alarming. One particular article in the Chicago Tribune when she passed away, those whom she cooked for, a
Mhm,
family, the Walker family,
mhm.
when they interviewed them, they said that they brought her here as a gal. And
Oh,
so you and I both know that this woman was 50 something years old when
come
she
on.
came
Yeah.
to,
Come
and
on.
so men are called boy and grown women were called gal. And I had the biggest argument with the librarian who wanted that to stay in the narrative when I did an exhibit there. And I had to explain to her, how is she a gal and she's
Come on.
50 something years old?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we
Ooh.
know the language. We know
Yeah.
the language.
Yeah. In the chat, I'm not good at doing these questions here, but there's a question. Are there any direct historical correlations between Bronzeville and Robbins, Illinois?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Probably would want to begin having the person who posed the question to take a look at the gentleman who had the Fuller products, S.B.
Ah,
Fuller. Uh,
yeah.
he built a home in Robbins, but he also clearly had a relationship with that community because that was at one point, was a really thriving community because it had a railroad that was stopping there.
Mm.
And then the waterways are close to it as well. So it ended up being really important for transport hubs. And believe it or not, my further research about Robbins, Illinois, I found out from Robbins, Illinois, you can sail anywhere in the world. So the waterways were so uniquely connected that that community was able to thrive pretty decently, even some of the farms, because they had the waterways in which they could send, products or uh, uh, things that they would grow on their small farms and plots and stuff. And of course, when we look at now, we see very famous people like Keke Palmer, and we can think of Sergeant Uhura. What's the beautiful actress that was in Star Trek? She lived there. Her father was the mayor of the town for a great number of years. I'm hoping someone going to put in the chat what I think is. Oh yeah,
Michelle Nichols.
yeah, thank you. But yeah, but a really unique tie in terms of the kind of employment that was happening through SB Fuller. I'm 66 years old, and I even remember the Fuller Brush man coming to the
I
house and
remember that name, Fuller Brush. Yep,
uh,
I remember that.
yeah, they would come
Wow.
selling the deodorant and other hair products and things like that. But that's what first comes to mind for me, the connection between Robbins and Chicago. And then of course when you look at the Tuskegee Airmen as well, a great number of them, would have trained even though the Robbins Airport was short-lived. But certainly when you think in terms of aviators,
Yeah.
there were aviators that lived in Chicago and in Robbins, expanding their work.
See, I think that all of this stuff is so important. We, in the part of the work of the Proctor organization right now is futuring Black lives. That's what we're futuring Black lives. And I believe that, the educational piece is so important. And as you're talking and, the stuff we've been, assigned to read and all that, and I think my own reading and studying, it just seems like it would just be just magical if we could set up something where we were really just educating our kids, white supremacy notwithstanding, hatred notwithstanding, we're finna tell you your story.
Yes.
Because it's exciting. It's especially when they try to tell you that you're nothing. It's just and just listening to the way you're talking, the Fuller Brushman, who would have thought all of that?
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't have thought all of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he
Um,
employed thousands and thousands of people all over the United States.
no, I know. So
Mhm.
in Chicago, there's a lot of people that grew up in Chicago, or lived in Chicago. And I bet your grandmother knew where all of them lived. Gwendolyn Brooks, Richard Wright, Louis Armstrong, Bessie Coleman, Ida B. Wells, Andrew Foster. Where did Ida B. Wells live, please? Where did she live?
In the 3600 block of South King Drive, and they're
Is her house
actually
still there?
the house is still there. It's privately owned. It's not a museum, but those who live in that house are not offended by the number of people that come by and take a picture in front of it, as well as putting the pictures online of the house.
Mm-hmm.
It is a city, state, and national landmark, but it's not a museum. It's a privately owned home.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. I would love to see where she lived because I loved her work
oh,
so much. Oh, I would love to see that. Bessie Coleman, where does she live?
Several addresses come up for Bessie Coleman. The one that they have a marker for is one that's on the 40th block of King Drive. I don't
Okay.
know if you've seen those kind of slender markers that go in front of homes that the Chicago Tribune did.
Yes, I've
But
noticed them.
there, but she also lived on the 4600 block of South Indiana as well. So several addresses pop up for her in the census reports and also in the newspapers. One of the things about the Chicago Defender, even when Nancy Green, the original and first Aunt Jemima portrayer, they put her full address in the paper.
Oh,
And so, you can read about a lot of places that notables lived at because the Defender put their entire address in the paper.
that was all right with them? They
I,
were okay with that?
I was like, I still try to figure it out. And I mean, even for years when I think about it, that, then it got reduced to, 60th in Marshfield or whatever. And then later it got reduced to West Inglewood. But
Oh man.
look up some of the older notables in the papers
Yeah.
from the 40s and 50s, their entire addresses in the paper.
See, that wouldn't have gone well. I don't know if it gone over well. I'm just thinking, in the 21st century, I'm thinking, I don't think that would have worked. So I read that in the Great Migration, I know that most of the Africans that were brought to the Americas did not come to this America. They went to, the Caribbean islands and all of that. But when Black folks were done being beaten and,
Yeah.
and they just, they were going to do something and the Great Migration happened. I read someplace where maybe the majority of them came to Chicago
Mississippi.
from Mississippi.
Yeah,
We
the
can ready to
largest.
have another migration if they don't quit acting stupid. I mean, just, I did. And you
Yes.
know what? It's so interesting because my mom was from Alabama And I remember even when I first went to Chicago and I was an intern at Trinity and to talk with all the families it almost seemed like we all came from the same family because everybody had the same, it's the same habits. Their mama said the same things in the same way and the way, the way you did housekeeping and cooking and all that. And I didn't connect that until I learned that the Great Migration happen and so many people from I thought just from the whole South, but from Mississippi were right there in Chicago.
Mhm. Absolutely. My family, my grandmother shared with me that she was invited to Chicago after he had read a newspaper article that was in the Defender paper that Executive Order 8809, which was created through President Roosevelt,
Roosevelt, right,
permitted and allowed for African Americans and women to begin working during the World War II efforts.
right.
And so my grandmother came in 1942 and she began working at Echo Products on the west side. It's a business that's still thriving today. They make spatulas and pots and pans and stuff. So Echo Products was converted
Oh,
into
okay.
making shell casings for the war, for bombs, and also they made canteens and utensils and other metal products for World War II's effort. And literally, I just showed someone my grandmother kept her first pay stub from 1942,
Wow.
make it as a part of telling the story of her arrival here and what she did. But if it had not been for her being a profound storyteller, I wouldn't know these things because a lot of people don't share it.
Right.
So she let me know clearly, each address she lived at, I was able to
Wow.
write those things down,
I love it.
as well as, what her employment was like when she first
Wow.
arrived. Yeah.
I want to ask you if you have journals and stuff like that in your collection, but I'm going to get one of these questions. It's from Oscar Worrell. It says, "Good evening. Personal connection to Jerry Oliver and the Palm Tavern. When Dorothy Tillman started the weekend boycott of Mollison School, I was a community mentor slash organizer teacher where the students were directed to come to the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity House on King Drive across from Mollison. My father, Walter Worrell, was the executive director of the Wabash YMCA during the 1950s and 1960s, where meetings were organized to promote Black History Week. You know him?"
Oh, yeah. I've never met Brother Walter, but uh, I would say that I was the secretary to Othello Ellis of Abraham Lincoln Center from 1979 to 1983. And
Oh,
so I got a
wow.
chance to meet a great number of people who spoke so highly of your father in terms of what he was doing at Wabash Y. And certainly I became a graduate student working at the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies. And I worked as an aide to Dr. Conrad Worrell. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so I've been crossing paths, and so I look forward to meeting Brother Walter one day soon because he always talked about the relationship of the Wabash Y and the Abraham Lincoln Center. I'm speaking in terms of Dr. Conrad Worrell, and I just thought it was so fascinating that people had family members or elders or fathers or uncles who were doing very meaningful work in social justice as well as social services. So kudos to you for sharing that. I appreciate
Loving
that.
it. I think I talked to Walter Worrell one time years ago. Dr. Carruthers had me talking to him about something. So um, I was fascinated and kind of intimidated because people who have that high energy and stuff, and that I know, okay, let me just ask my little questions and get off. But it's not nice to have you here with us this evening. Oscar Worrell. Amen. Bessie
Oh,
Coleman's work. This is from Jaislyn Pasmore. Bessie Coleman's work was critical to the airport's development 10 years after she obtained her license in making history. Do you have you have information about that part of her life, Bessie's life?
I do not, but I am very close to a woman who has been chosen to be the biographer
Oh,
Bessie Coleman and her descendants. She's a wonderful artist that taught photography for, oh, I would say well over 15 years over at Elliott Donnelly Youth Center. Her name is Jerry. What is Jerry's last name? I'm going to make certain that you guys get this because she's on Facebook and she does a lot of work around helping people understand that everyone has a story.
yes.
So you don't have to say, oh, well, I didn't achieve a doctorate or I didn't do anything that might be considered very noteworthy. Those whom we've compiled in our book, 100 Notable People and Places in Bronzeville, were folks who used to be, the shoe shine boy, the delivery person at the grocery store, the woman in the family who you knew made cha-cha jelly and jam. So these things to me are more uh, something to give accolades for as opposed to always looking at someone, the first black whatever. And
Right.
so, again, just want to remind people that their own stories matter.
Absolutely.
And the stories that everyone's sharing, I took a quick peek at some of the chat activity to see that everyone realizes that there's a bit that they know that can add to a layer of the small things that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
that's how,
fascinating.
yeah, that's how it's done. Somebody,
Yeah.
keeps adding a layer, I remember this and I remember that. And so, yeah.
Marcus Tab, my brother, he says his mother's uncle owned a neighborhood store in Robbins in the 60s and 70s, and he also owned his own boat and motorhome.
See, look at
Okay.
there. Wow.
Robert Abbott Sang State, founder of the Chicago Defender, paid for Bessie Coleman, the great aviatrix, to go to France to get her pilot's license.
Yes,
Oh my
imagine.
gosh. These
Imagine.
are wonderful stories. Marcus, come if you're back in, come back in and tell the story about the man in the uniform. I thought that was a good story. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was sharing earlier that the neighborhood that I grew up in Lawndale community on the west side, and we were surrounded, and my stories of the Great Migration, surrounded by factories, and so I'm assuming that the appeal to the community in the Great Migrations were these men who worked in the factories was able to buy their homes in the factories, whether it was a two flat or a single family home. But my greatest memory was coming home from school and seeing men watering or caring for either a 3x4 or a 4x4 or a 5x6 piece of grass like it was gold. And coming down the street, and again, and this is in the 60s and 70s, in a community and on the west side of Chicago where single parent families were more of an exception than a rule. And
Mhm.
so I would see these men in uniforms watering their grass as I come home from school that came from the factory, working all day and seeing their faces and the pride that they took. You better not step in their grass. That's one thing.
They
you,
weren't
you,
fooling.
you walking down the street, you weren't stepping in anybody's grass. But
Wow.
just seeing the pride that my memory
Mhm.
is the pride of them standing there in their uniforms, not not breaking the pattern, but coming home and going straight to sit on their porch or stand in front of their houses and water that grass. And you
Oh,
can only imagine how much that grass meant to them, or the
mhm.
stories that came behind that grass, of what it took to buy a home,
Yeah,
what it took to
yeah.
care for your family coming from the Great Migration, and as I was saying earlier, and now knowing doing environmental work, the harmful effects of living in that community that may have taken place, but yet seeing them, and also the other parts of it is that all of the black businesses that thrived in. I walked past three community stores that were all owned by black men,
Wow.
and
See,
so
isn't that the miracle of the miracle that slaps the majority population upside the head?
mhm,
That even though they tried their best to keep us from doing anything, from learning anything, and even spread the
mhm,
lie that we couldn't learn,
mhm,
they couldn't keep us from our greatness. And I
Yeah.
think that's the story. That's what I'm getting from, and that's what I've always gotten as I've read our stories, that nobody, we couldn't go to their highfalutin colleges and get all them degrees and all that kind of stuff, but we watched and we saw, and of course, we come from the great, Africa, and Africans are entrepreneurs and scientists and physicists and all that stuff. We brought all that with us. They thought with their arrogance that we knew nothing. We knew a whole bunch, a whole lot more than they did. And so even despite we came from a place where we didn't have all that Western stuff to help us out, and we still did what we did. So we just brought that over here, and that ticks them off.
Mhm.
That really makes them mad. And it's something that makes, I think, what gives us the power, our stories, the power, the power. So you don't want to have, you don't want to let us go to school. That's cool. We're going to learn anyway. I mean, all of it, making it illegal for us to read and all that kind of stuff. It was not a thing. And it's still not a thing if we can tell the stories, because what I'm afraid of sometimes, Sherry, is that too many of us have gotten subsumed in or absorbed in Western culture, and that whole thing that makes them believe that Western, anything white is better than us. And that would be a great tragedy to our great tradition of being able to do stuff in spite of them.
Hmm. Yeah, despite the ugliness of the nation and even the world seeing how ICE is operating without punitive
Right.
actions. I mean, they're walking around with no badges, no names, face covered. I have to always think back at the stories that my grandmother would tell me about how restricted their movement was, even without, having some federal authority, that a white man or a white woman could just come up to her and ask her, where are you going, or who do you work for? And that there were countless black men who were, said, well, who you working for, boy? And
Mm,
they didn't answer quickly enough, or maybe they were in between farming or in between sharecropping, that they would become those men who were part of they called it it's a term that they use for uh, picking them up because they supposedly were vagrant convict
right.
leasing. They started
Convict
with
leasing. Right.
convict leasing. And
Right.
so, I started thinking about, like, they were forcing these men to, build the ditches and the highways and other things and chain gangs and that kind of thing. And so, us looking at ICE, I kept thinking about our people had it four times as worse,
Yeah.
because it didn't mean someone that had the so-called authority. My grandmother repeatedly shared with me these stories because I didn't hear about Emmett Till until I was in my 20s. Even though I
Yeah.
made those trips to Mississippi frequently, she didn't start really explaining about how restricted our movements were, and I believe still are, in
Right.
large capacities, that any white person questioning your position or your breathing or your just being black, they were anticipating, or they expected an answer.
Right.
And so, again, when I look at ICE, I'm going, it's not even near the kind
Not,
of
not even close.
pressure that, black people had. So my grandmother literally shared with me, she had to have someone buy her train ticket to Chicago from a town that was more than 40 miles away from where she stayed at. Because that were boarding the trains in Inverness, Mississippi, they had a very large uh, cotton gin there. So the town would fill up quite large, when cotton was being brought to the gins. And so they would pull black men off of trains to keep them from leaving to go to Chicago. So since she knew that, she had to come to Chicago in secrecy.
Mm,
Like, she literally had to tell everyone that she was going to take care of an ill family member. She left one of her daughters behind deliberately
mhm.
to go with this farce of why she was leaving Mississippi. So our movements, have been restricted a long time. And she never imagined herself, coming back until after, the 70s. Then she, started coming back to Mississippi. But there was always this kind of looming idea that you might get stuck there if you go back because you left in secrecy.
See, and I think For anybody who's wondering, Slavery by Another Name, a book by I forget his name, it'll come to me in a minute, but it's a book that talks about the convict leasing thing and how slavery never ended and it still has never ended. And the conversations that I hear is that, they're detaining all these people. I read today that they arrest and detain 2,000 people per day,
Yep,
per day.
yep.
And they're filling these
And
centers.
90% of them lost their lives.
Right. It's
They
just
worked at the
amazing.
time. Yeah,
But
they
what
worked.
they're doing is keeping them because they'll use them for labor.
Yeah,
They're going to use them
yeah,
for labor. It's
yeah,
slavery by another name
yeah,
still.
yeah.
The evil of this whole thing is just remarkable, but it's not new.
I know.
Which is what you're saying. And so I think, even you, how did that impact you when you heard your grandmother tell that story about how her movement had been restrained?
Initially, I thought about like, well, who is defining who has the power and who doesn't have the power? And so that ended up being a later conversation for me to understand why my family was so adamant about going to a AME church. They were all members of Allen Temple AME Church that was on 30th and State Street. And in that church were so many activism actions going on. We hear about food pantries, we hear about children being fed like through the Black Panther Party.
Hmm.
But there were I guess you would say, cells of people doing certain things. So you had some churches that were doing after school programs, and some churches feeding the homeless, and some people sheltering people. And for some reason, Allen Temple AME Church was in the middle of a lot of things that were going on, and their largest thing that they were doing was meeting those who were coming as new migrants.
Mm.
And so, ended up again that these churches were like Red Cross stations, or I guess they might call it settlement houses. We
Hmm.
hear about, the white settlement house, the lady on the north side. I can't remember her name,
I know
but
who you're talking about. It's coming. It'll come to me. Yeah.
yeah. And, but there were other places doing this incredible kind of work to greet people. I ended up speaking to someone years ago about, was there a written network of how people help migrants coming? And I'm yet to get that answer. But I
Mm.
remember so well that this was one of the things that my grandmother said, that that particular church was known as a migrant center, like finding people employment, finding people housing. And as a result, my entire childhood, all the way to my adulthood, until my grandmother passed away in 1976, I never not saw somebody live with her. I
I
never
love that.
saw nobody not live with aunts. And matter of fact, when my brothers both went into the military in 74 and then 75, my mother immediately rented out their room to somebody that they were no relationship to us at all. So I know that there's a very profound work that has happened on levels that are not recorded in books, but they're recorded through experiences. And now that we have all of these tools, like this wonderful opportunity now, I'm just encouraging people to take up their phones and just record their own voices and send something out to other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, keep these
Absolutely.
conversations going. But
Absolutely.
yeah, we've always lifted each other up in so many different ways.
We're going to have to go back to that because we've gotten too individualistic, that's the Western way, and we've gotten away from our Western community,
Yeah.
our African, sense of community, which is so important. Somebody's helping me out with these names is Douglas Blackman that wrote Slavery by Another Name, and
Okay.
then
Okay.
Jane Addams, The Whole House.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So if somebody came uh, to you said, "Okay, Miss Sherry, I want to go on a tour. I want what if somebody came to you, what would be their best first step in talking to you and getting information or what, I mean, whatever." And I'm saying this because when I was in college, there was a woman named Mamie Clayton. Have you ever heard of her, Mamie
I have
Clayton?
not.
She's dead now, but she had the largest collection of African American artifacts and poems and books and records in her garage, I don't even know how I came across her,
Okay.
but She had first edition books. She had everything. She had everything. And I met her some kind of way, and I went into her garage the first time, and I didn't come out for like 4 or 5 hours. And she said, "You like this stuff, don't you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." And so she said, "You can come anytime you want." I was at her place every week. I mean, she was in Los Angeles, and she's
Okay.
died. And I think her son has sold the collection. But if people were to come to the Bronzeville Historical Association, and they were coming. What would they see? What should they ask? What could they expect to do to satisfy maybe their curiosity about all this stuff that you have and all this information that you have? What would they do? Would you go on a tour or put them in a room with some books, or what would happen?
So, my mom, God bless her, was a phenomenal storyteller herself. And so I would say that anyone that wants to visit to expect that they are going to have to tell their own story.
Love it. I
So,
love it. I
uh,
love it.
and you know, some people shy away from using their own phone, and we've got all of these tools and stuff. So I said, well, listen, I can record it in my phone and then send it to you, and then I'm going to delete it from mine unless you give me permission to use it, right? But you're not going to walk in the door here without being able to tell me about you and your journey. And that's when people really start taking a deeper look that their journey is so connected to their parents or to an aunt or to whomever that first storyteller that they met that gave them that interest in African American studies. Someone piqued that interest in you, or either you heard or saw something that let you know that you belong beyond just knowing
Yes.
the name,
Yes.
knowing where your parents came from. I would also say that if there is a discovery that you're working to find out more about, so many of the people come on Tuesdays from 10 to 2. We have genealogy workshops,
Yes. Yes.
and those genealogy workshops are for anyone at any level. And so there's no shame, there's no one here to do any kind of judgment. So I started out with letting people know that my father had 6 children with 5 different women. So
Come
they're
on.
going like, oh, if she said that, then I can tell my story, So,
I love
I
that.
tell her, I said, Williams really is not my last name. It's the name that got assigned to me.
Okay. Oh my gosh, you're cracking me up. But the stories are precious. They're precious, and I think the
Yeah.
power of it is that we live in shame or
That's it.
embarrassment so
Yeah.
much, and
Yeah.
then you sit in a room and you start talking, and somebody else will look, and you know that they know what you're talking about because they've been through it too. And then you think, oh, okay, and it gives you a little bit of freedom.
Yeah.
You don't have to walk
Yeah.
around with this false sense of yourself. And you don't have to be ashamed of anything because
Right.
everything that we've done and experienced, every person we've met, all of
Right.
it has made us who we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All of us.
I take pride in saying to people that,
Cracking me up.
what shaped me as a human being was one, the humor that both my parents had. And, deciding my name, if I was going to be a boy, it would have been Morgan David. But since I'm a girl, they named me Sherry. So I know it was some drinking involved in
Come
this,
on. I love it.
a bit of drinking going on.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
But
yeah.
when one people, again, that freedom, and you may not get to that point where you feel that you can openly share things that you find to be private, but at least start somewhere,
And,
'cause, yeah,
I think that what you're saying is so powerful. A lot of people go to the genealogy thingies with the computers and all that. And I think that's good, but I kind of am skeptical about it because, it's controlled by the majority population and I ain't feeling it. But when you go to a person like you and you do genealogy studies in a whole different way, I know from experience that I went to the University of no, the Black History Museum in Cincinnati. I did not know who my birth father was. I mean, I knew his name, but that's
right.
all. He died when I was little. And I wanted to know who he was. And I went up to that genealogy section of that museum And I tell you, we sat there for hours looking through all them, but they were real documents. They were, this woman was, and she would look at this, oh, that's not the right book. And she going, no, 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 that's not. We finally found his name. We found his birth date. We
Oh,
found where it was and I almost fainted because there's some power again when you find out who
yeah.
you are. And
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's not been messed with by the powers that be that want to mess with us. And I'm saying that that's what they get when they come to you. Everybody should go over there. Just everybody, just
Come.
go.
Just come.
Just
Just come.
because and the connections are just so amazing. It seems like because everybody came from Mississippi, it seems like everybody's going to be somebody's cousin. Sooner or later, you're going to
Oh,
find out.
oh, oh, listen. I've done several DNA tests. Apparently, I'm into the world. So,
Yeah, and that's glorifying. It's like, man,
uh-huh.
I've been looking at you. So how all the stories you hear about people. I grew up around the corner from. I didn't know you were my brother. Oh,
Yeah,
oh, wow.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
Yeah.
That happens a lot here.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we had
So
first cousin.
if if is at the Bron I've never been to, I mean I've been in the building obviously, but is there like an exhibit area or explain it for people who've never like me have never been in that space in its entirety.
So currently, we are shaping two new exhibit areas. You both, and all those are probably that are on the call as well, know that the Regal Theater was, the central place where large performances happened for the South Side. And so those glorious people who performed there, like Stevie Wonder and the Jacksons and Temptations and all of these notable people, we're planning to illuminate their work here in the next month.
Okay.
So we'll have an exhibit on the Regal Theater and then one on the Checkerboard Lounge. So,
Okay.
the explosion of electric blues happened here in Chicago, through so many blues artists. I mean, we could go on and on. Buddy Legend, I'm sorry, Buddy Guy, and, others who are still performing in their 90s. Many of them made Bronzeville their home and certainly brought the Mississippi Delta blues to Chicago. And so these are the kind of things that will be on display within the next, we're imagining 4 weeks we should have part of it, if not all of it, completely installed. What currently we have on display behind me, this picture right here,
Mm-hmm.
of a woman whom the photograph was colorized, but it's a depiction of a woman who is an entrepreneur. She has in South Carolina, she has her vegetables and other wares out for sale because she's a street vendor. And so it's part of the narrative that we're doing around the Underground Railroad in Chicago. Quite a number of people are well noted for being abolitionists in Chicago. And so I'm not going to call off any names because I want you to come and visit so you can read more about them on some of the displays we have up. The last part of that Underground Railroad narrative will include the names of soldiers that people have
Wow.
shared with me that their ancestors served in the Civil War.
Wow.
And so we'll have an honor roll up, and I'll make certain that you get the link for anyone that wants to just say, "Hey, my great great grandfather served in the Civil War, and this is his name."
Gosh.
And it's
It's
to
so
make an
fun.
honor roll for them here.
That we can be best friends, Miss Sherry. I'm just saying because I, 'cause I love what you're doing.
I love it.
Um, um, when when I visited, I always tell the story. It always moves me with Brian Stevenson's work with,
Oh wait, oh
God,
wait, yeah.
God. And the first time I went into his building and I saw those jars of the dirt taken from the places where black people had been lynched, it just did something to me. But then he took us out on like a field trip and we went to a tree
Okay.
and he had found out information that somebody, I forget the name, had been lynched there. We had our little shovels and our little thing, and we had to dig some of the dirt out from it. And I tell you, with each scoop, I was sobbing. I was sobbing, but I was also feeling like some kind of way, like I'm being connected to the people they thought they had erased forever.
Yes.
And so, your work, is right up my alley. I mean, it really is right up my alley.
It's because it's our work.
It is. It
It is a
is.
collective work, absolutely.
Oscar Worrell says the Chicago Black intellectual community for Chicago's Black history organized the Communiversity, whose
Yeah.
leadership was directed by Dr. Bobby E. Wright.
Uh-huh.
This, so this conversation making everybody just remember stuff and share. And I bet if we all got together and had a little wine,
Just a little.
just a little wine. I'm sorry. Loosen up just a little bit and just have a conversation. All the stories that would come up. I have a friend who he says, I hate to hear, he grew up in West Virginia. Every time we get together, they want to tell them something. I said, boy, you better write them stories down. Write them down. Those are precious. And I think that what you're doing is inspiring. It's inspiring. It's inspiring. And if we could get the children, because see, if you're a good storyteller, I can see having those little babies in front of you and you telling stories and their eyes getting wide as saucers, and it would inspire them in a period of time where inspiration is essential. It's essential. We need our kids to be inspired.
And the simple of things, the better.
Yes.
My mom decided one year to show children how to make biscuits. And I'm not going to tell you that we were getting up flour for about 3 months, but it was fine. It was fine. But you would think that that's complicated, but when children were able to touch and knead the dough and all of that, and we shared with the children that they couldn't take anything out because of safety and
Right.
health reasons. But the bus driver brought 4 kids back in who still decided to take dough. So, and then the second thing my mom found so profound was that she told me, when I'm speaking to not just young people, to anyone, to ask them, do they know their grandmother's maiden?
Yes. Yep.
And I
People
never
don't.
forgot that. She's like,
Mhm.
always find out, do they know their grandmother's maiden name? And if they don't, that's giving them homework. And I just, prayerfully, folks are able to say, honestly, I don't know if you don't know, because I've had people say, I
Yeah.
don't know. And
Yeah.
that's fine.
It's all right.
But we want them to start the story somewhere, start the story somewhere. But yeah, but 90% of what I know is stories that were shared with me, and I'm recalling other people's memories. So pray with me that I finish this book that's called Minnie's Daughters after my great great grandmother, because
Okay.
her daughters would have been my grandmother and my grandmother's sisters, who shaped my life in ways that just profound.
Wow.
I wouldn't know any of this if they didn't tell me the
Oh my
stories.
gosh. Oh my, I'm thinking that if people are listening to you and they haven't had that experience, they're a little bit jealous because it does add a richness to your life. It really does. It,
I
it
slept
makes
with
you,
my grandmother till she passed.
oh,
I was 16 years old, still sleeping with my grandmother.
see,
Yeah.
that's precious. That is really, really, really precious. Um, Reverend Marcus, you have anything you want to ask or share?
I do want to share and going back how things are not have not changed as much when we talk about what's going on in the South and like in Mississippi. I can remember when my son was in college in Jackson State about a little less than 10 years ago, and he was arrested in a Walmart, um, and the circumstances could have gone any way, but for shoplifting, what they said, even though he was not outside of the store, didn't take anything outside of the store. But the point that I'm making is when we went to his court case, the room was full of, and I forget, it was a little town outside of Jackson. I can't remember it, but the whole courtroom was full of poor people, poor white people, poor black people, and college students. And all of them got the same sentence:
Mm.
community service in a local park,
Wow.
convict labor.
That's
Wow.
all.
We're still a plantation. This is a giant plantation. And
Yep.
my hope and prayer is that some of these people who voted for the person in the White House and who thought that his policies were not going to affect them, but they're being deported. I hope that there's a window that's opening for people who always thought that what we said as Black people was a bunch of, we were being hyperbolic and it wasn't that bad. Now they're seeing it and feeling it and tasting it. And, and you're right, Sherry, that it's not even close to what our people went through and for hundreds of years. But the fact that they will they're being detained. I read where somebody who's lived in Kansas his whole life was being deported to the Central Congo Republic, the Central Republic of Congo. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But God has a way of, if you don't believe us, God has a way of showing people stuff. And so that's with them. And I have to tell myself to be good and not, I mean, I don't feel no tears or nothing when they get, arrested, and I don't, but I do feel bad that whiteness is
Yeah.
that evil
Right.
and doesn't care about anybody's life. The only thing they care about is money and profit.
That's it.
So, I just, anyway, but
If history
listen,
teaches us anything, Reverend Sue, is God will have the last say.
that's right.
We got
That's right.
receipts.
Yes,
We got
yes,
receipts.
Well,
yes.
Miss Sherry, we're gonna, first of all, when I come back to Chicago, we're gonna have to get together and talk because I just want to, and I'll bring you my story too. I'll bring you my story.
Fun.
I'll record it. I'll record it. Um, but your work is magnificent, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And oh my gosh, thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for your grandmama. I'm just saying, grandmama. I mean, I'm thinking she's here, and she said, "Girl, I told you. I told you." Um, I want to
Her
thank
name
you for
was
that.
Mimi. That was her nickname, Mimi.
Mimi. Okay.
Gladys Lampley Sanders. She had a gold front tooth.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. That lady had a lot of wisdom,
Had a lot
and
of
many of our ancestors did, as beaten down as they were, and
yes.
as they had every reason not. I just did a sermon called "Don't Let Your Disappointment Swallow You." And they did not let their disappointments fall. They had to be disappointed every single day, but they got up some kind of because we believe in a God that brings people up, not a God that pushes people down. Don't get me started. But anyway, that kept us going, and your grandmother and people like her, they just refused. They just refused. This is like when they burned down all those different places in our communities. They burned them down. The people, were like in Oklahoma, they were homeless for a year, but they built that thing back up. What? And that's what makes the other people so angry. But our spirits cannot be conquered. And that's what I love. And that's the power of what you're doing. You are feeding people's spirits. You're feeding the spirits. If I
My
could bring 400,
grandmother, that's the only thing she read was the Bible.
see?
And I found out later that she barely had a fourth grade education.
And
But to
listen.
be able to witness someone praying and
Hmm.
someone having a Bible as their reference for daily living was what guided me.
Yeah.
Because I said,
Yeah.
I saw all those thieves and thousands in there. I said, okay,
I
I
ain't
got
trying to do all that.
which
But when you realize that that is all they had.
that's all. That's
That's
all.
all our whole legacy of all the people, the
Yep, yep,
physicists and the
yep,
doctors and
yep,
all that came
yep.
from them reading that Bible
That's right.
nonstop, these, those, thous, and all that stuff. They read a foreign language in essence and
Right.
understood it in their own way. The story
Yeah.
just has not been told, has not been told.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous. I am just so I'm gonna get you when I get to Chicago, and maybe when you do the exhibits, maybe
Uh-huh.
we can come and do a live so we can walk around and show people what you're
Yes.
doing. That
Yeah.
would be that would make my heart sing. That would make my heart sing. But I'm so glad we're almost at time. Reverend Damien usually comes on and has a word with us. Reverend Damien, are you there? There he is.
Now you know I'm here.
That's my
Um,
Reverend Damien.
so let me start off first with thanking just the whole Proctor team, our media and communications team, Julie and Rita, and Miss Viola Henry, who is responsible for making sure that we knew Miss Sherry, that we know Miss Sherry, that we're in relationship with Miss Sherry, and then of course thanking Reverend Tab and Reverend Sue for facilitating the day. Miss Sherry is a international and national treasure. We thank and praise God for her taking, because grandma could tell you all of that. That does not mean you internalize it. It does
Right.
not mean that you embody it, and it does not mean that you make it your life's work. So, Miss Sherry, thank you so much for taking what your grandmother shared with you so seriously and what that is now meant for generations that will outlive you. So I want to thank you for your stewardship of the ancestral memory. So what we are talking about at Proctor is our 5 pillars of AI. One of those pillars is ancestral intelligence. So as we talk about African intelligence, African American intelligence, ancient intelligence, ancestral intelligence is another one of those pillars. What Miss Sherry is the embodiment of, the living witness of, is what ancestral intelligence looks like, passed down from your grandmother, and you taking that and now turning that into a living, breathing institution and organism that continues to serve this community and that continues to serve people all over Chicago and people all over the world. So we are honored that Miss Sherry is our neighbor, and we are thankful for the ways in which Miss Sherry has helped us understand the hallowed and sacred ground upon which we occupy at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference in terms of Metropolitan Funeral Home, as well as Chicago Defender. And so, Miss Sherry, as I go across the country or have different conversations, I perpetually talk about how Muddy Waters funeral, I think you told me, was the last funeral that took place on this hallowed ground. And then when we talk about the Parkway Ballroom, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, all of the luminaries that used to stop by here. And then, of course, the indomitable Annie Turnbull Malone, and what her work and her witness still means to this day as a forward-thinking, revolutionary entrepreneur who not only impacted our community, but also helped create other millionaires, and Madam C.J. Walker obviously being one of them. So this is priceless as we deal with a megalomaniac, narcissistic pedophile that continues to attack our history, wanting to put the signs up at the Smithsonian about the inaccuracies. We're thankful that we have people like Miss Sherry Williams, who is being clear about the preservation of our history, who is a living testament and testimony, and a living institution, right? As Dr. Carruthers is a living institution, as Mama Elaine is a living institution, as Dr. Wright is a living institution, Miss Sherry Williams, right here among us, is also a living institution. And so as much as AI continues to expand, which we understand the powers and peril of it, we still have grounded here an individual who, before you get artificial intelligence, you got ancestral intelligence in Miss Sherry Williams. And so we thank you, Miss Sherry, and we look forward to, as Reverend Sue said, coming over to see that Regal Theater exhibit, as we watched Hitsville a few weeks ago, and then going right over there and seeing you had the Motown review poster. After we had just watched Hitsville, the making of Motown, you had the review poster that was reflective of what we watched. So in this time of eliminationism, in this time of erasure, in this time of the attack on history, we are thankful that we still have living institutions all over the city of Chicago in general, but so thankful for the Bronzeville Historical Society that continues to offer a truthful, factual counter narrative to the ignorance and the vitriolic attack on our history. And the attack is only because, like Claudette Colvin, who had been schooled so well in February of '55, she took that stand in March because of that history now informing her sense of resilience, but moreover, her sense of self-worth and self-value. So the reason why we know the attack on history is make sure that young Black children don't have a sense of their greatness, brilliance that's connected to a DNA of individuals who are the architects of science, math, civilization. And then when you do enough history, Egyptians even created beer. So everything that everybody got, from beer to dice, everything comes from Africa. So we remain grateful for this dialogue and conversation. And we remain grateful for those of you all who joined us on tonight. We ask, as we continue to do this work, that you continue to invest. This is Black Philanthropy Month. We are highlighting independent Black institution. Bronzeville Historical Society is an IBI, an independent Black institution that we want to highlight, that we want to continue to lift up as we continue this month to highlight independent Black institutions. That is not original with us. Those are the words of Miss Maisha Wynn, who wrote the book, Futuring Black Lives, Independent Black Institutions and the Literary Imagination, where she wrote about Haki Mabuti, the Third World Press, EPE, Institute of Positive Education, and the Black Books Bulletin, which Miss Sherry has continued to keep that energy, to keep that spirit alive. So we ask that you continue to partner with us, invest in the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference with our 15 for the Future, $15 a month. What we pay for Netflix, what we pay for Tidal, what we pay for Hulu. We ask you to make an investment so that we can continue to do the work of futuring Black lives in the age of erasure, in the age of eliminationism, in the age where white supremacy is dying. We are watching the death sprawls of white supremacy. They are dealing with what Francis Cress Welsing said, genetic annihilation is happening. So we are seeing the death blows, right? The last death rattles of white supremacy. And what we want to continue to do is keep our foot on the gas. What we want to continue to do is keep our foot on the neck of something that is anti-Christ, that is anti-God, that is anti-liberation, that is anti-human flourishing. What we are seeing is the death of that. And so what we ask you to do, continue to invest, continue to sow, continue to partner with us as we stand against that evil that continues to persist. And it is the work of the Bronzeville Historical Society that continues to offer truth, that continues to offer factual information about our ability to continue to be those who maintain the hope that dogs couldn't bite out, that nooses couldn't choke out, that bullets could not shoot out, that bombs could not blow out. That is the hope that we continue to move forward with in the age of eliminationism, in the age of erasure. And people like Miss Sherry Williams continue to be North Stars as they offer hope, healing, as we continue to connect to our history. So we thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you all for and the Proctor Conference who made this possible. And Miss Sherry, we look forward to that exhibit being up and we coming over there so that we can continue to show the great work that the Bronzeville Historical Society is doing for such a time as this. It is priceless work, it is valuable work, and it is transformative work as it continues to offer us the kind of insightful, inspiring, intricate and intimate details about our ability to have been given less, as the young brother said, as Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote in The Water Dancer about Hiram, whose gift was the ability to remember. His whole gift in that book was his ability to remember. And Hiram said about his father and his half-brother when they bought him in because his half-brother didn't have the sauce, and his daddy, who was the slave master, wanted him to teach his half-brother to ultimately help him navigate because his father wanted to give him the inheritance. And he said, they knew I had been given so much less, but I was made of so much more. And what we are dealing with perpetually is the insecurity of white folks as they have to deal with the fact that we've been given so much less and we've been able to do so much more with legislative, the weaponization of public policy and everything that they've done. We've still continued to produce an Annie Turnbull Malone, a Louis Armstrong, an Ida B. Wells, a Fred Hampton as we continue to celebrate. So thank you so much, Miss Sherry, for all that you do. And we thank God for your willingness to continue to be steadfast and unmovable in sharing this powerful and much needed history for such a time as this. So we thank you and appreciate you all for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. And Miss Sherry, I want to say to you that, I had a whole set of questions I was going to ask you. I didn't get to none of them because we were talking about other stuff. But it's been very good. And I hope that everybody is filled with something that's going to make them think differently. But when they wake up in the morning, and I too want to thank the team, Julie and Loretta and Marcus.
Yes, absolutely.
Jesus. Because it doesn't happen without them. Trust and believe. If I had to do this technical stuff, wouldn't be none.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Loretta.
And to everyone who was with us tonight, thank you so much. We will see you next month. I'm going to hold up on telling you what the subject is for a couple of days because I'm trying to make some decisions, but we'll let you know and we'll put it out quick and in a hurry so that you can spread it with all of your friends and family. Please do get yourselves involved in the 15 for the Future campaign. And when we put this out, when it's up, when this conversation is up on YouTube and on our site, watch it again and get somebody else to watch it with you. God bless everybody. Have a good evening. Take good care.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Such an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.